privileged to deliver the welcome remarks for our World Standards Day celebration. Senator the Honorable Paula Gopee-Scoon, Minister of Trade and Industry, members of the TTBS's Board of Directors, Mr. Derek Lukpat, Executive Director, TTBS, Dr. Axel Kravatsky, Vice Chair, ISO TC 309 and Managing Partner, Syntegra ESG, Dr. Marissa Gowrie, Deputy Environmental Manager, Environmental Policy and Planning Division, Ministry of Planning and Development, members of the esteemed panel, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say a warm welcome to all our participants today, and I will start off wishing everyone a happy World Standards Day. The Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, TTBS, is pleased to host this World Standards Day celebration, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome all the attendees today. I would especially like to thank Senator the Honorable Minister of Trade and Industry, Paula Gopee-Scoon, for taking her time to deliver the remarks this morning. And today is a significant event for the global standards community, as it recognizes the efforts of experts who spearhead the development of standards to aid in the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This year's World Standards Day theme, Standards for SDGs, our shared vision of a better world, is indeed a timely one as it follows the historic London Declaration, ISO's climate commitment, which was approved at the September 2021 ISO General Assembly by 165 national standards bodies from across the globe. The London Declaration seeks to accelerate the achievement of the Paris Agreement, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the United Nations Call for Action on Adaptation and Resilience. Today, we will hear about TTBS's contribution to the implementation of the SDGs. As the national standards body, TTBS has engaged in several national, regional, and international standards projects that directly support the SDGs. Both standards and conformity assessments, such as testing, inspection, and certification, are essential components for facilitating trade, increasing foreign exchange earnings, as well as ensuring the well-being of a society, as we seek to strengthen our local manufacturing sector, especially in this COVID-19 pandemic. With the focus on the SDGs at the international level, there's increasing attention on greener production, low carbon technologies, phasing out fossil fuels, and facilitating investment in cleaner, more environmentally friendly systems, processes, and products. In alignment with the international trends, TTBS has also prioritized projects related to biodegradable material for food packaging, energy efficient lighting, appliances, and buildings, LPG DME, a blend which is an environmentally friendly fuel, as well as a suite of standards to support the infrastructure for electric vehicles. However, we are still faced with a number of sustainability challenges at the global level, ranging from climate change, food security, economic uncertainty, poverty, and humanitarian crisis. Therefore, it is essential that steps are taken to ensure that businesses operate safely, resiliently, and effectively, while adhering to the principles of good governance to foster improved trust, accountability, social responsibility, and environmental stewardship. Consequently, today's World Standards Day event is a commencement of our public launch of ISO 37000 for governance of organizations, which we will be adopting as a national standard shortly. As part of our national economic recovery efforts, there's a heightened need for improved flexibility, agility, rapid digital transformation, and the evolution of the manufacturing and business sectors. Today, our expert panel will provide some insights on the impact of international standards on the national landscape and how we can accelerate the implementation of the UN SDGs, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. In closing, I would like to thank all participants today. I encourage you not just to listen, but also make your voices heard, for it is because of the collective wisdom and knowledge of technical experts like yourselves that we are able to build a strong, agile, and responsive standardization system in order to realize the 2021 theme for World Standards Day, Standards for the SDGs, a shared vision for a better world. Thank you. So that concludes my brief remarks. And I would now like to turn you over to Dr. Marissa Gorrie to deliver brief remarks from the Ministry of Planning and Development. Dr. Gorrie is the Deputy Environmental Manager in the Environmental Policy and Planning Division at the Ministry of Planning and Development. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Gorrie, who has been a part of many standards projects in support of the environmental mandate for our country. So Marissa, you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just checking that you can hear me well.
Loud and clear.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Minister of Trade and Industry, Senator the Honorable Paula Gobiscoon, Chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, Mr. Lawford Dupre, Vice Chair of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, Dr. Axel Kravatsky, Executive Director of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, Mr. Derek Lukpat, all other participating ministries, divisions, departments, and agencies, representatives of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today, I am pleased to bring remarks on behalf of the Ministry of Planning and Development as we join together in commemorating World Standards Day 2021, aptly themed our shared vision for a better world, standards for the SDGs. The United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development exemplifies this vision of a world we want, representing the plan of action for a bold and transformative shift towards a sustainable and resilient path for people, planet, and prosperity. In 2015, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, alongside other world leaders, pledged common action towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda. Arising out of this commitment to establish a successful path for our country, the National Development Strategy for Trinidad and Tobago 2016 to 2030, commonly referred to as Vision 2030, was developed and represents the means through which these global aspirations are incorporated into the national planning process. Vision 2030 is our country's comprehensive national development planning framework, which provides the vision and context for a better Trinidad and Tobago. There are 5 overarching thematic areas that guide our thrust to developed national status, which includes putting people first, nurturing our greatest asset, delivering good governance and service excellence, improving productivity through quality infrastructure and transportation, building global competitive businesses, and placing the environment at the center of social and economic development. In crafting Vision 2030, the SDGs were given extensive consideration and are purposely interconnected and aligned with Vision 2030's national goals. We recognize that a similar approach has been taken by the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards to the National Standardization Strategy, which highlights the alignment of the National Standards Project to the SDGs. The Roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago, Transforming a New Economy and Society, also demonstrates the importance of standards in creating an enabling environment towards rebuilding of our economy. For instance, within the manufacturing sector, standards are critical towards ensuring weaknesses and inconsistencies are addressed and adherence to international standards and technical regulations are met, enabling effective trade on the national, regional, and international levels. This will contribute to improving production capacity and promoting new niche products. At the Ministry of Planning and Development, We understand that the implementation of the SDGs is a formidable challenge given the scope and complexity of the 17 SDGs and 169 targets. This challenge has been further exacerbated in the decade of action, the year 2020 to 2030, by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on development gains towards a greener, inclusive, and more sustainable Trinidad and Tobago. Achieving progress at this time is critical and therefore requires working across policy areas and engaging multiple stakeholders, creating an enabling environment at the local, national, and international levels. This is critical to ensure that effective institutional mechanisms supported by concrete policies and actions are in place to achieve sustainable development. The Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards demonstrates the importance and potential partnership and engagement towards the attainment of SDGs, since the work of this organization directly impacts on government, private sector, and communities at large. Appreciating that the standards system is built on collaboration, the Ministry of Planning and Development is very pleased to continue partnering with the TTBS to ensure that the necessary principles that underpin sustainability are pursued and established. With this, a notable demonstration of collaboration was through the Ministry's request to the TTBS to develop a national standard for alternative products to expanded polystyrene. Apart from ensuring a common national nomenclature and understanding of the terms biodegradability and compostability, the compulsory standard will also facilitate verification of these claims and product safety. It is anticipated that this would work towards safeguarding the environment against single-use plastics and by extension redound to the well-being of the citizenry. The 17 SDGs are interlinked. They demonstrate that action in one area will affect outcomes in others, and that development must balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Standards are indeed cross-cutting in nature and provide a solid base on which to create public policy that helps further the SDGs, creating an enabling advancement in several elements of the same social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainability. These are one of the ways through which the government will achieve national and international commitments across the three dimensions of sustainability. This is exemplified in the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards National Standardization Strategy, which includes a number of projects relating to sustainability, such as a circular economy, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and environmental management, SDGs 7, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, contributing to the achievement of a range of other SDGs from decent work and economic growth, SDG 8, reduced inequalities, SDG 10, to life on land, SDG 15. At the Ministry of Planning and Development, we recognize this important contribution of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards and commit to continue collaboration towards Trinidad and Tobago's progress in our national and international commitment for a better world. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you all a happy World Standards Day 2021. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gorry, for those remarks on the occasion of World Standards Day and for clearly highlighting the importance of standards to the achievement of Vision 2030, as well as the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we have a very tight program today, and I would immediately like to turn you over to Dr. Axel Kravatsky. Dr. Kravatsky will be given an overview of ISO 37000, the first international standard for governance of organizations. And please note that the bios will be available for all our speakers today. My colleague, Ms. Badlow, will be posting the link in the chat and it will be made available after. So without further ado, Dr. Kravatsky, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hold on, this is the wrong screen. 1 second. Sorry.
So while we wait on Dr. Kravatsky to organize the presentation, Dr. Kravatsky is one of the key persons involved in the development of the international standard. So I'm now turning over the session to him to go through the standard.
Great. So you're able to see my screen clearly now, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So thank you very much for the invitations and all protocols observed. So would like to say two things about, in order to understand the ISO 37000 and the role that 37000 plays in the world of governance, it's important to understand two factors relating to ISO. The first of all is its objectives is to create clear and unambiguous provisions in order to help trade and communications. And that includes, for example, terminology. So in Trinidad and Tobago, at this point in time, there is, or until now, there has not been a uniform definition of what governance of organizations or corporate governance, as it is usually referred to, because we usually speak only for a subset of organizations that doesn't apply to all organizations. So now there is a clear set of, the purpose of ISO is to establish world consensus on terminology that is important for trade and communication. The second aspect that's important to know is that ISO standards are built on the principle of consensus. So unlike many other forms of agreements that are reached around the world, ISO standards are explicitly inclusive, and it is through the national member bodies, such as the TTPS, who are conducting a national process of establishing consensus on a topic that is then communicated and worked with at the international level as well, that you build up an international consensus in a transparent, democratic, and consensus-based manner. A third aspect that's important in relation to standards is to know that there are three waves. There have been three waves. First, standards were mostly about product specification, then business processes, and we all know of some of these very important and standards. And then there's also a new generation of standards that deals with business potential or organizational potential. And ISO 37000 falls into this third category. ISO is a global organization. It has currently 166 members, and there are 801 technical committees and about 24,045 standards as of today. And the TTPS has partnered and twinned with the British Standards Institution to lead the one technical committee, which is TC 309, Governance of Organizations, and also in the convenership of Working Group 1, which is working on governance of organizations and has delivered the 37,000 and is currently working on 2 new standards. Also, there are many liaison organizations involved, which I will name. Within the context of SDGs and SDG 13, for example, on climate action, on climate, the importance of climate, it is useful to know and important to note that ISO has committed at its recent General Assembly to put climate action into all new and revised standards to focus and facilitate the involvement of civil society because it does have this capability of working across the world with national constituencies and to put in place a measurement framework and planning framework to report further progress. So in many countries, including in Trinidad and Tobago, there are a number of documents produced in relation to corporate governance or governance of organizations. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, corporate governance. And so that is, but these are developed by for the use of specific constituencies. And that is true all around the world, and that is good, and that needs to be further encouraged. But in addition to that, it is important to note that there's a order of precedence. So at first, the highest order of precedence is the legal international order. Then you have the national legal order, so where you have the laws and statutory requirements. And then you have external mandatory regulations, such as, for example, the regulations by the stock exchange or by the central bank or by the SEC. And then you have external voluntary regulations. And so ISO standards fall into that category, and they're external voluntary standards that organizations can adopt in order to perform better and in order to demonstrate to all their stakeholders that they can be trusted and are able to work better together. And on the basis then of such standards, for example, you can then develop internal regulations through which you give life to all the preceding requirements and recommendations for good action. So ISO standards are applicable to all countries, all sectors, and all types of organizations. So there is no form of organizational, there's no organizational form in Trinidad and Tobago to whom this standard does not apply. So at the moment, until the standard was published, it was difficult for organizations that were, for example, statutory bodies to find guidance on what good governance constitutes in their case, because there was nothing specifically for them. The same is also true. There is some guidance developed by civil society organizations in relation to nonprofit organizations. But how would they communicate? So, for example, if you're seeking funding from an international agency and you say, yes, we're doing good governance, and you say, well, what is your standard? And then it is useful to be able to refer to, this is our basis upon which we determine what good governance is. And also if, for example, a state enterprise wants to support community organizations and wants to ensure that all organizations involved have good governance, then what would they use as their standard for that? And then they can use the same standard for themselves as it is for their partners. And in a world in which the world is seeking to solve important problems within the following 8 years, collaboration will be the key. Competition is optional, but collaboration is necessary. And so let's look now specifically at governance. So the purpose of governance is to promote sound decision-making for the benefit of stakeholders to whom they hold a legal and a moral accountability. The work is being done through this technical committee, 309, and you see that it has 55 participating national member bodies, Trinidad and Tobago being one. It has 23 observing members. Amongst the 55 is also, for example, St. Lucia and Jamaica, and I think Barbados is an observing member at this point. And all three these Caribbean countries have been very active in the development of this standard. And the Caribbean certainly pulled its weight in this. And then you can see that there are currently 7 working groups. And this is how it is organized. And in total, you see this working group, for example, has working group 1 has 217 members. And so overall, within ISO terms, this would be not the largest, but it is amongst the more highly participatory committees. These are 25 liaison organizations that have been participating in this process. And many of these organizations also have their own governance guidance. And so it is important to bring it together and establish a joint consensus, and as the world moves forward. Also helpful to understand, because to understand the differences between standards. So ISO is producing a range of different types of documents, and the Technical Committee 309 can be used to exemplify that. So, for example, anti-bribery 3701 or compliance management system 37301, which was also published this year, are management systems that have requirements and therefore can be certified. And whistleblowing 37002 uses the same structure. It's a management system standard, but it's a guidance standard and therefore cannot be certified. 37000 is purposefully a guidance standard and therefore cannot be certified. But like other standards, you can publicly disclose that this is what you're using as your guide for what constitutes good, and then you can report on how you're applying the principles and how you are assessing the outcomes of your governance. And there are also technical specifications. For example, that work is commencing now on internal investigations. So let's dive more specifically. So 37000 is the first ever international benchmark on good governance. And it distills 11 core principles and that are at the heart of all successful organizations. There's one primary principle, which is purpose, and there are 4 foundational principles, which are value generation, strategy, oversight, and accountability. And in order to be able to implement that, you need also 6 enabling principles. And together with the standard also specifies some conditions for good governance. And together, that constitutes the international benchmark. So the overall structure could be illustrated like this, that there are governance conditions which refer to the construction and development, maintenance and improvement of an integrated governance framework. And then there are specific specifications for governing bodies. And then in the overview clause, the outcomes of organizational governance are illustrated and specified, and then together with guidance for how to apply the principles to your organizations, what factors to take into consideration in order to find something that is best tailored for you, and how to report. And then there are 11 there's clause 6, which contains the specific principles. So overall, there are 4 important benefits and unique benefits from adopting ISO 37000. First, it is enabling in the sense that, as I've illustrated, it enables organizations to apply those requirements that may exist for their specific types of organizations. And for those that do not have guidance, it specifies that guidance. It allows comparison across. So you can work together with partners all around the world and within Trinidad and Tobago in order to work together towards a common cause in the conditions of trust. It's complementary. Many organizations are using ISO standards for many other fields, technical fields, IT, resilience, environmental management, many different domains. And the 4th aspect is that it is inclusive, and it ensures that all stakeholders are considered, including also developing countries are given specific prominence. So as a result of the ISO standards, we can imagine 37000, it is possible that the following trends might be accelerated and further developed. So there will be greater consistency in terminology and a shared governance conceptual framework. It will be clear that purpose is at the center of all organizations and that organizations exist to fulfill their purpose. It is likely and possible to have stronger oversight, have better and stronger risk governance, and better accountability. So both the scope, the rigor, and the clarity as to what constitutes oversight, what are the components of risk governance as opposed to risk management, how those 2 things fit together, what the responsibilities are, and what the risk accountabilities of the different parties are, will be much clearer. And then it is also important that many organizations are not that simple that you have a non-executive governing body and a single body to which you have delegated, but it is very possible and likely that, for example, families are involved, that the state has an important role to play, that there are subdivisions, that there is maybe a network of organizations. All these aspects are now facilitated by having a clear terminology and a clear framework, and the thinking and the work, the decision-making work that goes on in the governance itself is more integrated, because you need to integrate many considerations, including the aspects relating to sustainable development goals. So if you look at the sustainable development goals, then Vision 2030 in theme 2 identifies for maybe this period, the medium term, it was from 2015, so maybe this is exactly the time now for the medium term goals. For example, public institutions will be high-performing professional entities meeting the needs of all. And also the law enforcement system will be efficient and citizens have confidence in justice. One of the goals that is being addressed through that is peace, justice, and strong institutions. Now, ISO is providing a tool by which you can look at all SDG dimensions and see which standards are applicable to it. And so, for example, industry, innovation, and infrastructure has the most standards pertaining to it. And in peace, justice, institutions, there are almost 160 standards that apply to it. Now, as it relates specifically to 16, there are 4 standards there and you look at the specific criteria for what it means. So, reducing corruption and bribery, developing effective, accountable, transparent institutions at all levels, responsive participatory decision-making, broaden the strengths of participation of developing countries. So through the ISO process and these specific standards, Trinidad and Tobago can effectively, efficiently, and purposefully lead the development and progress on theme 2, or specifically SDG 16. And the foundation upon which the other 3 standards are built or are integrated into the governance framework, not built, but integrated into the governance framework, is 37,000, and that provides the link to it. So I thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions and any further elaborations that you may desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kravatsky, for giving us that comprehensive overview of the governance standard and the impact that the standard could have at the national level, from finding the purpose as an organization to being more accountable, transparent, and contributing to our environmental sustainability over the years to come. So thank you very much for your presentation. We have a question and answer session later, and we'll entertain any questions during that session. So I would now like to turn the session over to our Honorable Minister, Senator, the Honorable Paula Gopee-Scoon, our line minister for the TTBS. We are happy to have the minister with us today, and we are so happy that you could join our World Standards Day celebration. So I would now turn it over to you, Minister.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good, and I'm going to be very quick, so please forgive the salutations. I'll tell you, I have cabinet earlier today, so I do have to rush. So I'm very pleased to join everyone, and I'll tell you that I listened to the last speaker. It's very, very interesting, and I wish I could have stayed to even be part of the question and answer period. But I am trusting that everyone will take good use of that time, because these solutions are what we should be enjoying and participating in. So pleased to join you in celebrating World Standards Day 2021, themed Standards for Sustainable Development Goals, Shared Vision for a Better World. So today provides us with the opportunity to recognize and promote the importance of standardization and to acknowledge all the stakeholders, local, regionally, internationally, who continue to collaborate to develop and implement national, regional, and international standards. So that the TTBS, as we know it, the Bureau of Standards, play a critical role in monitoring and implementing international standards locally. As the national standards body, they represent the interests of stakeholders in two of the well-known international standards bodies, namely International Standardization for Organization and International Electrotechnical Commission. So representation in these bodies allow our national experts and stakeholders to directly contribute to the development of international standards and to ensure that these standards meet the needs of Trinidad and Tobago for accelerated socioeconomic transformation and increased global competitiveness. This year's theme recognizes the integral role that standardization plays in the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted by all United Nations members as a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. These SDGs recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, while simultaneously tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and our forests. Attainment of the SDG goals requires the cooperation of public and private partners guided by national, regional, and international standards, coupled with the relevant conformity assessment tools to support the implementation of these standards. So that standardization and related activities are key elements in the sustainable development of our national economy, the health and safety of our citizens, reducing energy consumption, promoting efficient work and reducing product failures, and the protection of our environment. Standards assist in enhancing local and international business competitiveness, reduce technical barriers to trade, contribute to strong export markets, and assist firms to compete in regional and international markets. And on an individual level, standards provide consumer confidence as it gives the assurance of quality, safety, and reliability. So you would all have recently heard the Honourable Minister of Finance in the fiscal 2022 budget say that this government is focused on accelerating the implementation of the national quality policy, with particular focus on the manufacturing sector to ensure adherence to international standards and technical regulations and to improve our competitiveness. And the policy will improve the reliability of measurements and increase the number of accredited testing and certification facilities. And to ensure that we effectively meet required international standards, the government remains steadfast on strengthening our national quality infrastructure. The quality infrastructure is the institutional framework that sets out and implements standardization, conformity, and accreditation processes, and will create a strong foundation for international trade and enhance the capability of our companies to compete. It also ensures that products and services sold in Trinidad and Tobago meet the minimum requirements for the protection of the consumer, health and safety, and the environment, locally and abroad. To this end, a national standardization strategy, which we know of 2019 to 2022, was developed with critical input from local stakeholders and is currently being implemented. And this strategy is guided by the three themes: ensuring a robust and responsive national standardization strategy, creation of a conscious standards society, utilization of ICT tools to modernize the standards development process and improve access to standards. The strategy is essential to the implementation of the national quality policy as it identifies the key standardization requirements of the country for improved trade facilitation and overall global competitiveness. To date, several standards have been approved in alignment with the strategy. That includes standards for information security management systems and standards on cloud computing in support of the government's thrust for the digitization of the economy. And these standards are essential tools for data protection and privacy and the overall digital transformation, which is critical to the diversification thrust. Also, standards for construction, textiles, consumer products, and electrical cables to support economic diversification. Standards on good agricultural practices to support the drive towards ensuring food security and economic sustainability. Standards for electrical vehicle charging systems and relative infrastructure to support the initiative for low carbon emissions. And for non-medical face masks and cleaning chemicals to protect public health and safety during the COVID-19 pandemic. And collaboration is currently being undertaken with WASA to update the national, that's the Water and Sewerage Authority, to update the National Plumbing Code to ensure clean and safe water for all. And these standards are all relevant to SDGs as they aim to create an equitable, safe, healthy, sustainable, robust, and well-functioning society. And in addition to the standards highlighted, targeted programs are being undertaken to further facilitate a standards and quality-focused culture. For instance, the certification program, which I'm extremely proud of, for food and beverage standards and product compliance and labeling and product testing support through the Export Booster Initiative. Indeed, funding has been allocated to assist manufacturers in achieving international certification that will cover the costs related to standards adoption and implementation, including audits and inspections, the acquisition of the specialized equipment, infrastructural modifications, as well as the certification costs. And to date, we have had a number of applications, of which 6 have been approved, and thus 6 firms assisted, and 7 are currently being processed. And these applicants represent a range of firms in the agro-processing sector, food and beverage, and engineering and industrial sectors. The establishment of the Trinidad and Tobago Accreditation Service for Conformity Assessment, TITASCA, an independent national accreditation body which will inspect how a body, product, or service meets specified requirements, so that the draft legislation has been prepared and is currently being reviewed. And recently, the TTBS would have launched its Building a Quality Culture in Trinidad and Tobago project, which is a significant step to creating a quality culture among our manufacturers, exporters, consumers, and citizens. And this project will further promote the benefits and application of standards by all stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, we must recognize and personally congratulate Andia Prasad Maraj, a member of the Standardization Division of the Bureau of Standards, for receiving the prestigious 2021 ISO Next Generation Award, which recognizes young professionals from ISO members who are championing sustainability-driven standardization and the value of partnerships to tackle issues from a multidisciplinary perspective. And Andia, I personally congratulate you on behalf of the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So that the management and staff of the Bureau must also be congratulated for the tremendous work being executed as they continue to champion the development and implementation of standards, measurement systems, and conformity assessment services for the competitiveness and sustainability of Trinidad and Tobago. Further, the development of standards requires key expert groups and stakeholders in the relevant sector, and so we would like to recognize the contributions made by these individuals. And as I come to a close, I wish to reiterate the Ministry's commitment to supporting the work of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, and I wish to encourage you, our valued stakeholders, to join us in fostering standards to create a viable environment which promotes high-value products and services to provide a better quality of life for every citizen of our blessed country. So once again, I wish you all a happy World Standards Day 2021, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak at your forum. Thank you very much, and again, I have to go immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for taking the time. We appreciate your support on this significant day.
And sorry, but I didn't realize that my camera was off for most of it. I apologize.
Yeah. No problem. Your words were excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. I would also like to recognize that we have 2 key members of the IEC, the International Electrotechnical Commission, here with us today. First, Aristia Kriakati. She's the country affiliate program manager, as well as Amori Santos. So he manages the Latin American and regional Caribbean initiatives for the IEC. And we're very pleased to have them be part of our session. So we are totally on board with our international standardization and so grateful for your continuing support over the years. So thank you, Minister.
welcome, and I really welcome as well all of the international consultants who are with us this morning. Without you, we cannot move forward quickly enough so that we become globally compliant with standards and expectations with regard, especially with regard to all of the world standards. And of course, we pay keen attention as well to climate change. Thank you all.
Definitely. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye. So we will now move on to the next part of our agenda. So I'd like to recognize Aristea from the IEC. We have some remarks, so please allow me 1 minute while I share the video that they have graciously prepared for us. So in 1 minute, I'll be sharing my screen.
Hello, I'm Aristea Kyriakati, and I'm the head of the Affiliate Country Program. We are here in Dubai, where the IEC General Meeting takes place for the first time in a hybrid format. And over the past few days, we have had the opportunity to welcome many affiliate delegates from all around the world, attending either on site or remotely. Amongst them, the NEC, the National Electrotechnical Committee of Trinidad and Tobago.
Hello, I'm Amaury Santos. I'm a Regional Director of IEC Regional Center in Latin American and Caribbean countries. I would like to congratulate our NEC in Trinidad and Tobago for your participation, contribution in our events in this general meeting, mainly in the Affiliate Forum, the Workshop for Industrializing Countries, and the NEC Secretaries and Presidents Workshop also. It's really interesting and really amazing contribution and participation that we can receive from your NEC. Thank you very much.
On the occasion of the World Standard Day, under the theme of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, I would also like to take the opportunity to congratulate the NEC Secretary, Ms. Kimberly Badlu, and the NEC President, Mr. Sanjay Bahadur Singh, for the amazing work and support in promoting standardization in the national and international level through the NEC of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, we hope to continue our contribution. We would like to continue our support to the Trinidad and Tobago NEC, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we wish you both a fruitful meeting on the 14th of October. Thank you.
So I hope that everyone was able to see the video and listen to the contributions from Aristea and Amaury. We have been involved in a lot of the standardization activities in the electrotechnical area. And I would like to personally thank Aristea and Amaury for delivering those remarks. I would now like to turn the session over to our panel discussion. And we have a group of experts. They are all heavily involved in our national, regional, and international standardization activities. So my colleague Kimberly Badlu would have posted their bios. Today we have Dr. Kravatsky with us, as well as Mr. Devendra Chattergoon, who is the chair of our National Merit Committee for Quality Management, Mr. Christian Virgil, who's a senior lecturer at COSTAT, and he is a key member of our National Technical Committee for Occupational Safety and Health. Then we have Dr. Sanjay Bahadur Singh from the University of the West Indies, and he is the chair of our National Electrotechnical Committee, and also Dr. Rochelle Adams, who is the chair of our National Committee for ICT. And today's panel discussion speaks about the impact of international standards on the national landscape. So I would just like to get my team together. Just in one moment, I will be starting the panel discussion. So just ensuring that all my panelists are ready for the session. So please permit me 1 minute. Okay, so we'll start with Dr. Kravatsky, and he will basically give us a key summary of the impact of international standards on our national landscape, and specifically in the area of governance. So Axel, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. I want to focus on SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And I've covered already, I've already said that there are these 4 standards relating to it. And I would like to illustrate how they work together and how they substantially enable organizations, including ministries and others involved in this process, to govern effectively and achieve ISO 16, focusing on only one dimension, and that is oversight. Okay, so helpful to know is that the definition of organizational governance is a human-based system by which an organization is directed, overseen, and held accountable for defining its, achieving its defined purpose. Okay, now in oversight, amongst other things, the governing body needs to ensure that there is an internal control system. An internal control system consists minimally of financial control, compliance, and risk management. In addition to that, there is also effective reporting and taking corrective action. The governing body also needs to assure itself about this topic. So governing body needs to assure itself of the reliability of the reporting, the effectiveness of the internal control system, and the governance system as a whole. And to do that, now, what do you use? You can use anti-bribery because 37001, because it gives you direction and guidance for how to establish financial controls. You can use for compliance, you use the compliance management system 37301. In compliance, you also need the anti-bribery because you need, it's a subset or it's a part of it. It's one dimension of it, particularly as it relates to Sustainable Development Goal 16. And then you have whistleblowing as well, okay? Now, in addition to this, you also need to have a number of activities, audits, direct reporting with internal control functions. So you have to have private meetings with them, and you need a whistleblowing and feedback system. And guidance for this, therefore, is also given by these standards. And what I want to emphasize is that governance is not only about commitments, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals depends on active and rigorous implementation where the oversight is effective and accountability is clear. So that gives a snapshot as to how effectively you can contribute to Sustainable Development Goals based on 37,000 and associated standards. Is that?
Thank you, Axel. Yes, that was a good summary in terms of, how all the international standards under the umbrella of governance work together, because I think sometimes we don't understand that standards are meant to work in a consistent, cohesive manner. And it is not simply one standard that we need to achieve our goals, but it is a multitude of standards that support that overall big picture of governance. So while I move on to my question, I would like to invite my panelists to turn on their cameras. So we have Sanjay, Dr. Adams, Mr. Virgil, as well, who would also provide some input. But related to the discussion that we have heard this morning about governance, and you have been leading governance initiatives worldwide, and you play a lead role in the ISO Technical Committee, TC 309 as the vice chair. In the context of Vision 2030 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, how do you see ISO 37000 contributing to environmental, social, and governance, the ESG, in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, so we are in a decade of action. The UN Secretary General has said that the IPCC's, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its most recent report called Code Red for Humanity. If we do not turn around, the world as we know it will cease to be able to exist. And at the moment, we're increasing our climate contributions about 16% per year. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be meeting in Glasgow. Today, we're meeting in China with COP15, or maybe today is coming to a close, but it's on climate diversity. So we're losing, at the moment, out of 8 million species, 1 million is endangered, okay? Now, with climate change, this will just accelerate. And at the moment, we are not on a path of 1.5. We're constantly increasing. So what a lot of organizations and countries are committing to, and Trinidad and Tobago has made its own commitment, is about reducing this harm. But this harm, and this is currently we increase by 16%. We need to decrease it by 50% in the next 8 years. So if we say this administration and the next administration need to achieve a reduction by 50%, okay, to be consistent with the global average. And that means that there needs to be concerted and clear and accountable action by all. And so therefore, all the governing bodies, all organizations need to be contributing their bit, and we need strong institutions that are able to contribute and innovate. And I want to stress that it is not only about reducing impact, it is also about doing the same thing but less bad. But it's about doing new things that are actually solving the new problems that are coming, okay? And so it's gonna be a decade of great change, and having clarity of what to govern and how to govern is very important in that.
Thank you, Dr. Kravatsky, for those words. I think it is important as a nation that we look critically at the standard and determine how we can benefit, because we have seen a lot of issues cropping up in recent times, and it suggests that we can do better. And I think the ISO standard provides that platform or foundation and those essential principles that we need to follow. So thank you so much for your overview of the standard. And I would now like to turn the session over to Mr. Chattergoon, Devendra Chattergoon, who is a leading quality consultant, and he will share some thoughts on ISO 9000. He has been heavily involved in that. So Devendra, I turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nadita. All protocols observed. And I'd like to start off first with the SDGs, which relate to TC 176 SC2, which of course is the committee responsible for ISO 9001 and a number of other standards. As we should be seeing on the slide, there are 6 SDGs which speak specifically, which TC 176 SC2 addresses through 9001 and its various other standards. I'd like to quickly switch now to looking at the landscape and the impact of ISO 9001 in particular on the landscape of quality in Trinidad and Tobago. And what we have here is the growth of ISO 9001 certifications in Trinidad and Tobago, starting from around 1994 right up until the most recent data in 2020. And we see that there was the peak based on the official statistics in 2016, which coincided with, of course, the fall in oil prices. And that, based on some surveys that I've been involved in, had a significant impact on the number of certified companies. Overall, you find that there has been a significant impact. My estimates are that in total, the companies which are certified to ISO 9001 have contributed, or perhaps their revenues are in the region of about 10% of GDP. Okay, so that's my slides, Nadita. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Devendra. So I know that you have been involved in quality management for over 25 years, and you have also been actively contributing to ISO TC 176 as the convener of SC2 Task Group 5, which is preparing for the potential revision of ISO 9001. So given all of that background, how can ISO 9001 help Trinidad and Tobago in its export diversification drive? And further, how can organizations use the 9000 series to better manage quality and meet these rapidly changing needs and expectations in the global economy, and also support the UN SDGs? So quite a mouthful, you know, I mean, the impact of 9000, we have seen that it has proven benefits over time. But as we shift and adjust with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, COVID-19, what impact do you see the 9001 standard having?
Okay, thank you for those questions, as long as they may be. Permit me first to quickly recognize two persons on our agenda for their contribution to quality at the TTBS itself during our drive towards the initial certification to the ISO 9001 standard in 2005. Some of you in the audience may not yet be aware that TTBS was the very first national standards body in the Caribbean and North America to achieve this distinction of certification. Sorry, and the two persons on the agenda, Mr. Lawford Dupree, who was then the executive director, and he of course supported all of the initiatives of the TTBS quality unit, and Dr. Marissa Gowrie. I don't know if she's still with us, but she worked alongside me for a brief period during the implementation of the QMS. And I'm quite happy to see that she has continued to support the TTBS over the years, including of course her contribution at this very webinar. So, sorry, let me now answer your question. And the first part, of course, being, how does 9001 support exports? Well, ISO 9001 or the sector-specific versions, for example, the 29001 for oil and gas, has become a basic requirement for doing business in the petrochemical sector when contracts are approaching the US $1 million mark, because of course of the risk associated with oil and gas. To look at our regional leader, or soon to be regional leader in the energy sector in Guyana, for example, Exxon has sponsored over 20 local companies to implement a QMS to meet ISO 9001. So it demonstrates the commitment in terms of getting the international recognition to participate for us in Trinidad in the Guyanese market, for example. For Trinidad, companies seeking to export, and this is partly due to the shortage of foreign exchange, have quickly found that ISO 9001 is necessary to become approved suppliers to large potential customers, of course, outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And within the past couple of weeks, I have been approached by companies in Trinidad which are either seeking to expand their export market or just entering the export market, again, because of the customer's demand. So for that first part of the question, 9001 and the sector-specific versions, for example, the oil and gas sector-specific version or the 22,000 for food, can definitely assist Trinidad and Tobago in the export drive. So coming to the question about the rapidly changing needs and expectations from customers, ISO 9001 provides a solid foundation for managing all the processes which directly produce products and services, and many of the processes which support the creation and delivery of value to customers. The COVID-19 pandemic has allowed companies which already have a QMS based on ISO 9001 to easily adopt relevant standards like ISO 22301 for business continuity, which includes managing the work from home or work from anywhere arrangements, ISO 45005 for managing COVID-19 in the workplace, and I believe the next panelist will speak a bit more about that, and the ISO 27000 for information security management, which is even more critical since the world has moved online. As we would have seen in the first slide, ISO 9001 and other standards in the family, such as ISO 10014, Guidance for Realizing Financial and Economic Benefits, support 6 of the UN SDGs with a strong focus on SDGs number 8 for economic growth and number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Are you aware that many of the power companies in the Caribbean, like TNTech, are certified to 9001? So just to wrap up, the 9001 standard as the single most widely known and used of the over 24,000 standards published by ISO is definitely recognized by the large customers in our export markets, and 9001 and the other members of that series do contribute to the attainment or realization of the UN SDGs. Thank you, and I hand back over to you, Nadita.
Thank you, Devendra, for that very comprehensive response. The 9001 has really set the framework and the platform for all future management system standards being developed by ISO. And it has a very broad appeal in terms of, you can customize the requirements to suit your own needs. So I think there's definitely further evolution for the 9001 system in the country, and also as a supporting framework to the management systems, for example, health and safety. So thank you, Devendra. And as we go into our next panelist, there's that direct linkage. So Mr. Christian Virgil, my next panelist, I invite him to do his summary. And then we will, pose a very thought-provoking question to him, especially in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Virgil, please proceed.
Good morning. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can, but it is in presenter mode. So if you can adjust it. Thank you. And while Mr. Virgil organizes the presentation, I encourage all the participants to start putting their questions in the chat. We will have a question and answer session as well. And Dr. Kravatsky will have to leave shortly. So we'll want to get, really some comprehensive responses on these questions that are being posed from our participants. So Mr. Virgil, you could take it away.
Thank you. Pleasant good morning to the chair, pleasant good morning to my fellow panelists, pleasant good morning to all participants. My presentation shall be brief. I'm going to examine basically how the health and safety standards can have an impact on the national landscape. So what I try to do is summarize everything into a very neat presentation. So the foundation of my presentation this morning would be the examination of two standards, ISO 45001, a safety management system standard, and ISO 45005 or ISO PAS 45005, which provides guidelines for safe working during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, there are 7 SDG goals that are tied to these standards. So I'm going to highlight the first 3 on this slide and the last 4 on the other slide. So what I would have done is I would have gathered all the SDGs that are sort of similar in terms of how the ISO standards can have an impact on the SDG goals and by extension, national landscape. So I have 3, 11, and 8. 3, good health and well-being. 11, sustainable cities and communities. And 8, decent work and economic growth. Now, under these different SDG goals, we have targets. So what I wanted to do is get down to the nitty-gritty of the targets that I would have examined and believe are directly related to these standards. So I have target 3.3, 3.9, and 3.C attached to 3, which is to fight communicable diseases, reduce illnesses and health from hazardous chemicals, and to increase health financing and support health workforce in developing countries. Under SDG 11, we have a very important target that is tied to the standards. We have reducing the adverse effect of natural disasters. This is target 11.5. Now, this target speaks specifically actually to the impact of meeting the challenges of adverse effects of natural disasters as relates to our responders and those who are working towards dealing with these disasters. We need to make sure that they are kept safe. Now, SDG goal 8, decent work and economic growth, we have target 8.8, which is to protect labor rights and promote safe working environments, which is something intrinsic to ISO 45001 and by extension also ISO PAS 45005. Now, what links all of these SDGs together is that they are all focusing on health, safety, and well-being. And that is how ISO 45001 and ISO PAS 45005 are linked to these sustainable development goals. They are all tied to that same common theme of fostering health, safety, and well-being. Now, the last 4 goals, I'm going to go through very quickly as well. We have 10, 9, 5, and 16. I didn't put them in order. I put them in order based on a certain pattern I saw. So under 10, we have reduced inequalities. And I examined a very important target under that, target 10.2, which is promote universal social, economic, and political inclusion. And under SDG 9, we have a very important target as well, develop sustainable, resilient, and inclusive infrastructures, which also extends to human resources as well, developing human resources. We have gender equality, which is SDG 5. And the target I looked at there will be target 5.5, ensure full participation in leadership and decision-making. And it pertains specifically to gender equality or encouraging women to be involved and take a substantial role in this capacity. And the last SDG, 16, peace and justice, strong institutions. I looked at ensure responsive, inclusive, and representative decision-making as the target I wanted to tie to our standards. Now, under that, you would see I have one central or a commonality between all of these SDGs, in that they all focus on inclusion, participation, and respect. ISO 45001 and ISO PAS 45005, they all encourage that type of behavior as relates to managing health and safety. They encourage inclusion, they encourage participation, and they encourage respect of workers and by extension, the wider community. Now, just to summarize and end my presentation, by focusing on how by ISO 45001 and ISO 45005, by influencing the SDG goals and by extension, the targets I would have identified here, they are going to have an impact on national landscape in that context by their influence on these goals. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vigil, for giving us a deep insight into the SDGs and the impact at the national level. Now, you have been a key member of our National Technical Committee for Occupational Safety and Health. And in the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been significant challenges globally. How do you see the ISO standards helping to mitigate the risk associated with the pandemic? I mean, on today's news, we've been hearing about safe zones, etc. What impact do you think the ISO standards could make to having a safer, population given the pandemic situation?
Okay, thanks for that question. The working environment is basically where a lot of people spend a lot of their time. And it's definitely going to be an area or place where we can see the transmission of the virus and by extension to the wider community as they go home. So securing the workforce and securing the working environment is integral in the fight against this COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll just draw attention specifically to ISO 45005. It provides really good guidelines on how to work safely during this COVID-19 pandemic. One of the questions I would have dealt with is what makes this different from the ISO 45001? Why do we need to have something extra? And my response to that was that when it comes to managing something of this nature, we want to make sure and have a framework and enough guidelines that people don't get lost as to what to do in terms of managing things very safely. Quite often, when we don't have a proper framework, what we see happening is that things are missed, important steps are not taken, and very important processes or very important elements are absent. So the ISO 45005 standard would have provided really good guidelines on how to work safely during the pandemic. One important thing that I saw that I really wanted to highlight, because it often goes a little bit underrepresented or well, it's not considered that much, would be the impact of the entire thing on our health, our mental health. And that's a very big impact, especially as many of us are working from home, so that it covers everything, not just from the idea of the transmission of the virus, but also other impacts that we need to really take into consideration. It allows you to consider those things as well. So to summarize our response, by securing the working environment, by ensuring that we aren't transmitting the virus or we are reducing transmission rates in the working environment, we are going to help fight this pandemic. And by preventing transmission among the workers as well as the wider community, as these workers are going to go home eventually. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Virgil, for clearly demonstrating that there are very relevant standards that we can use at the national level to help us in the COVID-19 pandemic. And in saying that, I encourage all the participants to take a look at that PAS 45005, as well as the series of standards under the TC 283 for occupational safety and health. So thank you so much for that response. I will now invite Dr. Sanjay Bahadur Singh to do his summary. And he is a senior lecturer, actually the head of department at the University of the West Indies, so in the electrical and computer engineering department. And he has a lot of expertise regarding e-mobility, electric vehicles.
Thank you, Nadita. Good morning, everyone. So what I have in front of me, in front of you on your screen, is essentially a mouthful. So I'll try my best to identify to you all that we're looking at from an educator's perspective, a technical educator. We have both education and technical enlightenment that we must satisfy. And here at the University of the West Indies, particularly in the electrical and computer engineering department, we are responsible for producing engineers that are going to go outside there and make a difference in this world. Now, when we look at the core of the program, our program is accredited. And the thing about our technical program is, and I've highlighted it on the screen there, that we must have a clear understanding of appropriate codes of practice and industry standards. So when we factor in that we have to have this key element for technical learning, we must incorporate it into the curriculum to ensure that these codes and standards, locally, regional, and internationally, are exposing our students. And therefore, that addresses a lot of the SDG goals on the education side. So that's the 4, 8, and 9. But critically, the technical standards, this is where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of our students are exposed to the standards and the associated bodies. And I have here on the screen the IEEE, the ANSI, ISO, IEC, ISA, NFPA, NITA, and the ASTM. And how does this happen? Well, we have worked with the TTBS to ensure that these students can get some measure of support, whether it be for their projects. And I'll give you some examples. We have projects that are geared towards renewable energy, electric mobility, communications, automation. Students will require some measure of support with standards and accessing standards. So we're giving them that support, the TTS 171 Part 1, NFPA 70A, where they physically must wire circuits according to code, therefore ensuring that there's technical capacity and competence as they transition from the student life to the professional side. We look at design, IEEE and IEC. If you're looking at switchgear, installation coordination, conductor sizing, a lot of our research projects require very varied sources of input, and part of that technical review is standards. So we have a host of standards that they will have to be exposed to, and they must become very knowledgeable. And if they are to ensure, of course, that their research is the quality that they require. And more importantly, we look at cutting edge. Yesterday, I was on an IEC workshop, and we're looking at artificial intelligence, that standard. And you now have AI and big data playing in the same space. The debate was really about trust versus certification, personal versus business data. So when we look at the exposure that these students must get from the suite of technical standards, it's quite a lot. And most importantly, they all contribute to these SDG goals, which would be the good health and the well-being, affordable and clean energy, the sustainable cities and communities, and of course the climate action. So Nadita, that's me in a nutshell. We have a lot that we cover from the education and the technical side, but they all dovetail to ensure that we can produce graduates that are very much aware and appreciative of the role that standards play.
Thank you, Sanjay. And we have been having the discussion about, introducing standardization into the educational curricula, and definitely the close collaboration with the universities, not just University of the West Indies, but also UTT, key priorities for the TTBS, because I would say your first introduction to standards would normally be through some of the academic programs. And it is definitely time that we formalize that arrangement. And we have been supporting the students in terms of access to standards. We have that special complementary arrangement where they can have the view only. So definitely you have the full support of the TTBS with regard to educating the students and creating the young professionals. But in terms of the whole summary, how do you see the trust of the government, and in terms of increasing the number of electric vehicles moving ahead? It has been a challenge in the past. I mean, we have tried several different attempts, CNG and now hydrogen and electric vehicles. Where do you see e-mobility really going in the future?
Thanks, Nadita. So that's a good question. I mean, we have been working with electric vehicles and producing the part 4 of the TTS 171. So we've made some progress there. So electric mobility matters because transportation is one of the sectors for the country to reduce its carbon footprint. If we look at the document that the country has submitted for its NDCs, we have committed to reducing by 30%, which I believe that number is somewhere in the vicinity of about 1,700,000 tons as CO2 equivalent by the end of 2030. So that's a significant jump that we have to make, and transportation is definitely one of the sectors in there that has been targeted. And electric mobility is one of the potential solutions to achieving that reduction. And that's where, when we look at the 2 and the 3-wheelers, the light and heavy commercial vehicles, the mass transit, they offer us the ability to reduce that footprint, because switching to an EV can reduce these greenhouse gases, these GHGs, greenhouse gas emissions, by as much as 27 to 30%. And that's for a sedan, which would translate into something like about 1 ton per year. Of course, that depends on use and other factors, distance covered, application. But pull that back a bit. Why does this important? Why does it matter? Because this all contributes to, this is less air pollution. This is better health and wellness. This goes back to the goal that is number 3 on the screen in front of you all. And the EV provides a clear route for GHG-free transportation when the energy mix pivots to renewable. So now we have a fantastic opportunity to move towards totally carbon-free. Of course, it's going to take a while, but we have to move on that path. And the other bit about it is that it also matters because it presents other opportunities. Globally, the cost of the electric vehicle is becoming more competitive. And it's also changing that paradigm shift in terms of vehicle ownership. You don't necessarily have to own it. With the advent of rideshare and all these other facilities, you now have the opportunity to access transport on demand that's significantly cleaner. It's more affordable. There are less moving parts, which means that it's a different type of technical support. There's an opportunity for capacity building there, which creates a different type of mechanic, if you like, because there's a lot more electrical. Then there's also the autonomous aspect. So we're looking at, of course, the jury probably still hung on that one based on some of the impacts globally, but they're going to get it right, but it'll take some time. And then, of course, the last bit, which is a personal favorite for me, is the performance. The performance is actually quite better than an IC, and the driving experience is super cool. So I'll stop there, Nadita.
Thank you, Sanjay. I mean, the future is going to look very different as countries across the world try to fulfill the different agreements, the Paris Agreement, we have COP coming up as well. So a lot of different commitments being established across the globe. So we had another panelist, Dr. Rochelle Adams, but unfortunately she has an emergency situation, so she wouldn't be able to join us just yet. But I would like to raise one of the questions to the entire panel, starting with Dr. Kravatsky, because he has another engagement shortly. But the question came in from Jerry Beeman. Adoption and implementation of standards is an indispensable gateway to development and trade for the region and its various institutions. How are these being actualized through training and other upskilling interventions within organizations? And I think, if we start off with Dr. Kravatsky, we could take all the panelists in turn to respond to that, because you all come from some level of academic backgrounds where you interact with students, young professionals. So Axel, before you leave the session, I invite you to give your response to that first.
Yes, well, it's a very good question, and we have to think about who the stakeholders are. So in the case of an organization, and we look at governance of an organization, we can think of the external stakeholders. So for example, society. So Trinidad and Tobago has a high number per capita of state enterprises and state bodies, for example. And in order then to hold these organizations to account, it would be useful if stakeholders, including the media, have clear criteria by which to benchmark the organizations. Then we have the parliamentary joint committees. It would be useful for the joint committees to have a standard against which to judge and to evaluate the performance of the ministries who are part of the governance role and the institutions. Then you have institutional investors, like all the banks, insurance companies, NIB. it would be useful if they had a standard by which to judge their investments and to say what is a good investment, what is not a good investment, what is a responsible investment, what is making the world worse. Is it okay to invest in heavy polluters? Okay. Then you have the governing bodies, and you have who would be, it would be good if they had an agreed standard, that they actually agree to say this is good governance, and they don't ask, well, what is good governance? And, you know, is it not true that you can't legislate that and it is all just moral? And, you know, so having a clear standard, and part of their continuing education would be a way to do that. Then you have corporate secretaries, and you have internal auditors, and you have risk management professionals, and you have compliance professionals, and you have procurement professionals, and you have all these different parts that are part of the governance framework. It would be useful if they had a standard in which they can say, that is good governance, and now you can purchase it from TTBS. You can conduct training with a number of different training providers, and you can improve over time. So it is not a one shot, it's a long game. It's not a race, but it's urgent because at the moment, a lot of organizations, in order to be viable in the short term, well, let's say medium term, you know, of let's say the next 5 years, I think you know, the regulations in most other countries will change so dramatically that they will affect whether or not you can participate in an international supply chain. If all the business is just local and you're not connected to the rest of the world, then you will just experience the consequences of heavy disruptions. So like now, for example, supply chains, energy prices. This will not stop, it will increase. And in order to do that well, you need to have a governing body that is able to sense and respond and empower everybody in the organization to do their bit. And it is about value creation in a responsible and risk-adjusted kind of way.
Thank you, Axel. So I would now invite Mr. Virgil to add his thoughts, and then Sanjay on that. You know, how do we really make a difference through the training, upskilling interventions?
Thank you again. The initial question I was posed, one or two of the words had actually got my connection dropped for a while. Can you just repeat it again? I want to make sure I'm clear as to the question.
No problem. Let me read it again. So the question came in. So I'm just scrolling through the chats, and adoption and implementation of standards is an indispensable gateway to development and trade for the region and its various institutions. How are these being actualized through training and other upskilling interventions within organizations?
Okay. So I'll talk about a little bit from the educational perspective and my knowledge of the curriculum. So in the curriculum here at Culture, Science, Technology, and Applied Arts at Trinity and Tobago, we do actually cover the standards in details. And the thing about it is, now with the ISO 45005, ISO PS 45005, we actually do hope to now talk about the existence of these standards and what they can do. So the hope really is that through implementing the curriculum, we are now equipping our safety officers and professionals to be able to actually come to the Bureau of Standards, become fully certified in the ISO 45001 in particular, and purchase the standards from the relevant bodies and use them within their organizations. So within the curriculum itself, we highlight the importance of these standards to all our students and the foundation that they give to an organization in terms of preparing for health and safety issues, or rather mitigating health and safety problems. So through the curriculum, we are highlighting the importance of these safety standards in particular. And from experience, our students do go on to try to implement them at their respective organizations. Quite often, some of them would have tried to pursue getting certification, I believe, through the Bureau of Standards or maybe internationally if they leave. One important things about it that we highlight is that these standards were created by so many experts, so many leaders in the field, and they know exactly what is required to make sure that the objective of those standards are materialized. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We had experts that created these standards and provided a solid framework for us to achieve our objectives within the organization. So they learn it through curriculum, and then they are now able to apply it at the organizational level, and that leads to the transformation that we want, a truly effective system that protects the safety and health of our workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vigil. I think Axel wants to make a point.
Yes, could I just I want to also be very practical and suggest that if anybody has questions about 37,000, for example, or a related standard to that, then my recommendation would be to approach the TDPS, approach Nadita Ramachala. She is the conduit and knows all the members of the National Mirror Committee, for example, and there are 4 members in the audience right now who have participated at the international level as experts, have spent countless hours editing the document and are intimately familiar with it. So Andrea Primus, Deborah Souza Okpo-Fabry, Trisha Moonen, and Rani Lakan-Nareis have all participated. And so there's a rich resource in Trinidad and Tobago that can support persons who are interested in applying this. Thank you, and I will.
Thank you, Axel. Okay, so thank you so much for your contributions, Axel. So I know you would have to leave shortly, so it is up to you to determine when. And I also invite, I know Devendra is just waiting to answer this particular question, being involved in certification, but I will let Sanjay go first, and then we could conclude with Devendra. So Sanjay, your thoughts around the training and upskilling part of it.
Sure, thanks Nadita. So the first bit is, it is an education and an awareness issue at the heart of this, and it's really about identifying that there needs to be a thought process and appreciation that when you don't apply standards, there's the risk involved, particularly with technical training, is significant, and it can balloon into loss of lives as well as, of course, the inherent financial risks. But most importantly, if I am putting on the hat here as a technical educator, having the opportunity for students to be exposed via these student branches and these programs, it gives them an appreciation that they not only have access to see how these standards are applied, but also to a network of people and like-minded people who can guide them, particularly when we look to foster a spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship to satisfy a global market. A global market means that you must have some measure of appreciation and understanding of the role that standards are going to play, because at the end of the day, the standards can be considered as the harmonized language of goods and services. So this is critical. And when you look at the graduate, we want them to be exposed to that. So they are actually preparing themselves not only for the world of work, but the world of development and creation, where they can charter their own destiny on the global front. If they are in procurement as well, you want them to identify from an engineering side, there are standards that you must ensure you're going to follow, as well as the quality of the products that you're going to acquire. Procurement is critical. So in a nutshell, the thought process is critical, and we would like to ensure that from a student level, that is embedded, so they have a firm appreciation that they need to adopt this thought process moving forward.
Thank you, Sanjay. So I will turn it over immediately to Devendra for his thoughts on that.
Thank you, Nadita, and thanks for the question. So my colleagues have spoken from the academic perspective. Let me speak from the world of work or the consultancy perspective, when we look at upskilling persons and providing training and other methods within organizations to spread awareness and understanding of standards, various standards, as I would have mentioned, there is the 9001, the 22,000 for food, 29,001 for oil and gas, 17,025 for labs. What we find is normally the organizations are required by their customers to implement standards and achieve certification in many instances. In those cases, organizations, of course, have the choice as to whether they wish to send a couple employees out for training courses or to bring on board a consultant, which would be managing the entire standards implementation process. So what you find happens, at least within the arena of 9,000 and related standards, is the training and the other interventions, mentoring, coaching, practice exercises, workshops, and so on, would be done as part of the drive of the organization to implement management system standards. If I can speak briefly about product standards and product certification standards. For example, in Trinidad, we do have for bleach and for roofing sheets, I believe it is. What you would find in cases where there is product certification, there also is a requirement to have a basic management system standard. And through that project or initiative, the employees of the organization would be exposed to the organization's interpretation of the standard. So the employees generally would not be able to tell you what clause 8.7.6 says, but they will be able to tell you, in my job, I need to ensure that no products which give a test result of less than 7 microns are allowed to leave the factory. Thank you.
Thanks, Devendra, for that response. So there was another question, and I would just like to raise it to the panel, like any member is free to respond. Much has changed over the past 18 months as the world battled with multiple challenges. Clearly, we are not going back to business as it was. Are there systems in place for effective evaluation of the relevance of standards given changes that have occurred? So I'm not sure if anyone wants to start off the discussion, but I would say with regard to the TTBS, using the mechanism of our national technical committees and being part of the international standards development really allows us to keep abreast of the changes. And a lot of the changes that have occurred due to the COVID-19 means that even standards development had to be innovative and rapidly revamp its processes to deliver faster deliverables. Because, for example, the world is not going to wait 2 years to develop a standard for face mask. So a lot of fast-track mechanisms were developed at the international level, and that has also redounded to the national level. And we have our experts participating in the technical committees and keeping abreast of the developments. So Sanjay, Christian, Devendra, do you want to add any thoughts to that? You know, the relevance of standards in this particular COVID-19 time.
All right, Nadita, I'll take a quick stab. When I look at the question and I have a better appreciation for from where I sit, it means I have to step outside my box a little bit. And within the challenge, well, looking at the context of the COVID-19 and the challenges it has brought to the workplaces, as Devendra would have mentioned before, that has definitely created a different environment for us. And are there systems in place for effective evaluation of the relevant standards? That one, I think I'm not in a position to answer that one, because how I feel about this personally is that the challenges the challenges are there. We are creating standards to respond to it, particularly, I'm looking at it from a health perspective. It's going to be so difficult to confidently say, this is what we need to measure by. And that's the key thing here. The question asks about effective evaluation of the relevant standards. Because if the situation is dynamic and it changes and requires a revisit of the standards, then what you have, in my opinion, will be a shifting goalposts. So it's something that has to follow the problem. So we are always going to have to be reevaluating those effective, quote unquote, effective evaluation systems. That's my comment on that.
Thank you, Sanjay. Christian, do you want to jump in
Yes.
at this point?
Yes, the ISO PS 45005 jumped out to me immediately when I heard the question, and it was a direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't think I'm overstating it by saying if it wasn't for the pandemic, we may not have developed such a standard. So it was a direct response to that situation that we were confronted with. One of the things that I see taking a little bit of precedent, especially the shift to working from home, is a focus on the psychosocial hazards of work, which was a little bit understated for quite some time in occupational safety and health field for many reasons. One in particular is that it's very difficult to objectively assess as compared to other hazards that we may have. I mean, you can easily test the air for particular pollutants and so forth. And evaluating the psychosocial hazards can be done. It's just not as easy as the others, right? So one of the things I do like about it is that it does really talk a little bit about the psychosocial hazards as well. So I think that in itself is how the standards may have evolved to meet a new challenge directly in direct response to the pandemic to try to mitigate or reduce transmission rates, and even considering a little bit more, putting a little bit more focus on some of the hazards that we may have taken for granted, like psychosocial, for example, which is going to be a very serious hazard as we go forward with these changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vigil. Devendra, do you want to jump in with any comments on that particular question?
Right. Thanks to Jerry for the question. I'd like to start off by saying there was an immediate response from the standards community in that many standards were made available to the public for free. Standards for face masks, standards for ventilators. The TTBS, of course, has a standard on face masks that's available, I believe, for free as well, pass. So the response in the standards world to the COVID-19 pandemic was to look at the standards that would help the world get through the initial stages. And for standards in general, it's difficult to answer directly. What I can say is at the level of TC 176, which is the Committee for Quality, the standards had been looked at because we did have a number of standards in development. Some are still in development and revision to see if changes needed to be made. And what we realized is that the what a company has to do doesn't change, but the how they do it will change, because a standard, for example, 9001 will tell you have to control your service provision. That has certainly changed from face-to-face over the counter to online delivery in many instances. So the standards themselves from TC 176 were not seen as having to change. And of course, as Mr. Virgil would have just said, when TC 283 reviewed their standards, the 45001, they would have realized there was a gap in dealing with COVID-19. And in response to that, they created 45005 and 45003. Thank you.
Thank you, Devendra. So we are moving to close this session, but there are a couple of questions in the chat and I'll just respond to them. So there was a query about the assistance to SMEs. The minister would have spoken about the export booster. initiative. So I encourage, I think with Shivam Rampasad, to take a look at the initiatives under Export TT as well as the Ministry of Trade for support to SMEs in terms of being able to comply and building the capacity to comply with standards. And there was a question on whether the world is moving towards a standard charging method for electric vehicles. So Sanjay, I invite you to take that one and as well as give us your final thoughts as we close the panel discussion on what we can do to create that shared vision for a better world.
Thanks, Nadita. So that's a good question. There's been a lot of chatter on that. So what you end up finding is, of course, you have different standards for the charging, but it's often dominated by the manufacturers. So I've learned of discussions to ensure that there can be some sort of consolidated measure for manufacturers. But then, of course, you know, you look at it and there's the geographical location associated with the markets, coupled with the manufacturer's interests, and then, of course, the standards. So to answer that question directly, I do not have the answer to that. I am hoping that there would be some measure of transition to a standardization, particularly at the different levels, because of course you would have the AC and the DC charging. But whatever happens moving forward, there must be some measure of backward compatibility to ensure that the vehicles that are already on the market can have sufficient EVSE, the electric vehicle supply equipment, available. So time will tell on that. And in terms of what we can do to create a shared vision, Nadita, this goes back to the education and the awareness, and it's really a measure of identifying that these standards are an important way of protecting consumers, guiding and ensuring safety of personnel and property, particularly with the sector that I am in the electrical sector, and ensuring that, of course, the quality of goods and services that we use in that sector are of the standard required, so that, again, we ensure that safety aspect. So in a nutshell, as an educator and an engineer, we need to impress the instrumental role that standard plays to the young ones, and particularly whether they be, you know, leaders of tomorrow or technocrats, and they are not mutually exclusive. This needs to happen to create that culture that will continue. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. So I turn it over to Christian and then Devendra for the closing statements on this panel discussion.
Thank you again. The key word that I actually heard that I wanted to highlight as well, that word culture that was mentioned, I think that is very important, because when we talk about a shared vision, we sort of go into the realm of culture where we all, or most of us, hold the same values and ideals, and we both have this, we all have a similar sort of respect and appreciation for certain things. And I think standards offer the benchmark for us to have something that we could sort of coalesce around and all appreciate and respect, so we can all have the same idea as to what should be. And a more practical way of saying that is that the standard provides us with the framework as to what we all can sort of agree on is the best that we should look forward to, or the things that we can achieve. Of course, everything can be improved with time, but at least we have the foundation of having a shared idea of where we should be. And I think that's what standards really provide for us. It allows us to have an idea as to what should be considered that shared vision, that shared idea. Meaning that if I want to say that my working environment is truly safe, what can we all agree on should be the benchmark or indicator of that? And I really see standards playing a very important role in allowing us to say, okay, if we have these certain things in place, we all agree that this is a foundation of having something really, really good. So as it pertains to a shared vision for a better future, I do see standards as having that role. It provides us with a sort of light that guides us to what we think is the best at the moment. Of course, as we improve, we need changes, things are going to evolve. But I think that's the most important role of standards in terms of a shared vision. Provides a context to what should be considered that shared vision we should have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Virgil. So I will now turn it over to Devendra, but I'll also appreciate if Devendra could address a comment that came in from Jana Mohammed about awareness campaigns and the understanding of standardization so that people can connect with it. So Devendra, I turn it over to you to give your final thoughts around that.
Okay, thanks, Nadita. You put me on the spot. I thought you were going to handle the public awareness campaign for standards.
I will give my closing after, but given the sessions like this, it is one means of educating the stakeholders. Now, standards can be very technical, and some may require a technical understanding, like Sanjay was alluding to. Some standards are designed for the engineers. What we really need to communicate would be the benefits to the end user. So as TTBS, we have been engaging in increased social media campaigns and sessions like this to bring to bear the rationale for standards and the benefits that go with that. But as we seek to evolve as well, I think educating the students at different levels, so primary, secondary, and tertiary level, is also a key mechanism where you can create that basic understanding and appreciation of standards so that it follows you through your entire professional career. And it doesn't matter what technical area, what sector you work in. Once there's an appreciation, okay, there is a safe way of doing something for the electricians, the safety requirements for electrical installation. So whether it is as a consumer that you know what to look for when purchasing different types of products or accessing services, I think that is the basic level of standardization that we need the general society to get to. But then we get into the very heavy technical parts where you may need to design a building, or you might need to wire a home, or you may need to offer some type of consultancy to build a 45,001 management system. So I think there are different levels of interventions that are required. And as TTBS, we are doing more definitely through sessions like this, and also engaging with the National Mirror Committee members and sharing the expertise. But definitely there's a lot more that can be done, and is something that we are actively looking at. And within the National Standardization Strategy, we have that component to create a standards conscious society. Now, in addition to that, as TTBS, there is a project that has recently started in terms of creating a quality culture. And how do you create a quality consciousness across the society so that there's an appreciation of not just standards, but the systems that go together with that? How do you demonstrate that a product is of a high quality, or that a product is safe? So Devendra, I leave you now to basically take us to the close of the panel and give us your final thoughts.
Great. Thank you for handling the hard part of that question, Nadita. I want to support Nadita and, of course, my co-panelists that it has to begin in education. A former executive director of the TTBS once told me that he had gone abroad on a standards training program, and he was shown a cookbook, a recipe book, and that included standards and traceability back to national standards and so on. So standards really need to permeate our society. How that's going to happen in this digital age where you are bombarded from all sides with all sorts of things, I'm not sure, but I, of course, congratulate the TTBS on hosting these initiatives. Coming from South, I always enjoy the opportunity to log on rather than face the highway. So let's talk now about how can we create a shared vision for a better world? And of course, I'm doing this from the quality perspective. The most important reason why organizations implement quality management systems, as I was taught during the 2 years I lived in Japan while doing my MBA, is number one, to improve consistency, which is one aspect of quality, of the products and services they provide. The second most important reason is to optimize value within the organization by increasing efficiency. Many times companies talk about the bottom line, but that is old thinking. Now we talk about the triple bottom line, and there's of course the move for ESG and so on, as Axel would have mentioned. So although those were the principles I was taught in Japan, sadly, that has not been my experience within the Caribbean. To make a better world, we in Quality believe and have demonstrated, mostly in the developed world, that organizations, including government entities like the TTBS, must live the quality principles on which ISO 9001 is based. Unfortunately, many companies just get certification to have a piece of paper, which customers eventually realize increases the risk to their business. And they instead turn to organizations which are truly committed to continual improvement. So to summarize, by following the quality principles, which are common with many other disciplines, continual improvement, consistency, and so on, I believe we can get to this shared vision for a better world. I thank you, and I now pass back my virtual mic to the moderator, Nadita.
Thank you, Devendra, for those comments. I think definitely, as Mr. Paul Samy indicated, it is a cultural change that we need to take place in our country, because I agree with the comment that he's making. Sometimes the first thought is what are the costs associated with complying with a standard, rather than what are the ultimate benefits that can be derived from complying with the standard. So definitely that is a cultural shift and a philosophical change in terms of, having a deeper appreciation for standards. So I would like to close the panel discussion, and I'd like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Kravatsky, Mr. Chattergoon, Mr. Virgil, Dr. Bahadur Singh, for their thoughts and sharing insight and perspectives into, what are the impact of standards on our national landscape from a diverse perspective, from the academic, electrical, quality management, the consultancy, training. I think you all have demonstrated that there is a significant benefit to the use of standards, and we appreciate the time taken to be with us today, and also taking up leadership roles in our national and regional and international standardization activities. So thank you again to all the panelists, and we really do appreciate your time and your thoughts as we try to create that shared vision for a better world. So I would now like to move to the next part of our agenda, and it would have been indicated earlier by our Honorable Minister that Ms. Andhya Prasad Maraj, a representative from the Standardization Division, would have won an international award. So please permit me 1 minute while I share a video, and I will also invite Andhya to share her thoughts around the Next Generation Award. So let me share my screen.
Hello world, my name is Andhya Prasad Maraj, and I'm a Standards Officer at the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. I started off my career as a design engineer, but everything was standardized, so I thought, okay, I'd write the standards, and thus began my love affair in this field of standardization. I'm a cool, calm professional with a tiny mischievous streak. On a professional scale and on a personal scale, I am deeply honored and excited to accept the ISO Next Generation Award for 2021. At TTBS, I hold the national standards portfolios for energy efficiency, occupational health and safety, and automotive products. I'm particularly interested in learning about the strategies for incorporating sustainability development into our standards, so that we're not just making standards to solve today's problems, but standards that can help us create a shared vision for a better world. I also know that I wouldn't be here without the love and support of God, my parents, friends, family, and mentors. Thank you all for everything you've done to support. I'll see you all in Geneva next year.
So I now invite Andhya to share her thoughts about the ISO Next Generation and the impact that it has on the national landscape as well.
Thank you, Nadita. When I first heard about the ISO Next Generation Award, I must admit I was a little bit daunted. An international competition open to over 160 countries, and little old me, I thought it was a bit far-fetched. But with a little encouragement from Nadita and my colleagues, I sent in my application. In preparing my application, I was able to reflect on my projects and the people I've met while developing standards, from determined activists to government officials and industry officials, all pushing to create a better world. For many, standards represent an opportunity for hope, change, and growth. And you can see how we can tie in with this year's themes to create a better world. As a young professional, I'm excited and humbled to embark on this grand adventure of being the first ever recipient of the ISO Next Generation Award. And as always, I'd like to thank again God, my parents, colleagues, and everyone who has supported me throughout my career in standards. This is a win for all of us. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all and sharing all the information I've learned from my attachment at ISO.
Thank you, Andia. You have definitely made the TTBS proud, as well as the standardization division, and now the entire national community of experts with regard to standardization. So, I personally congratulate you as well and encourage you to maximize the opportunity that this award affords you. So thank you so much. And Andia is well known to Mr. Virgil and some of other committee members as a technical secretary for a number of committees. So Andia, we appreciate the efforts and we appreciate the acknowledgement and the recognition that you have brought to the country. So I would now turn you over to our next agenda item. So Andia, before we do that, any closing statements that you wanted to make?
No, I think it's an excellent opportunity for the country and CARICOM. And I must say I was overwhelmed with the amount of support and encouragement I got from the time the award was announced. When it was announced, my battery on my phone was at full charge. And by the time it was finished, it was at 40%. So you really see the involvement nationally, regionally, and internationally as we work together to create this better world.
Okay, thank you so much, Andia. So we will now move on with the agenda. And before we close today's session, I invite my colleague, Mr. Kenley Hadai, who has worked very diligently to produce a short presentation on our national experts to recognize all the inputs that we have received from a number of stakeholders across different sectors. And we'd like to specifically recognize those persons who participate as experts in international standardization, and also recognize some of our standards experts who recently passed away, but they have made significant contributions to the development of codes and standards for the national good based on a voluntary system where they contribute their time, expertise, knowledge, wisdom to the entire community to ensure that we produce standards that are relevant, practical, and suited to the needs of Trinidad and Tobago. So I invite Kenley to start the slideshow. So I would like to express my appreciation to all the experts who have participated in our standardization activities. What you would have seen before would only be a small subset of all the standardization experts that contribute to the development of both voluntary and compulsory standards. But we wanted to recognize on this occasion those persons that make a significant contribution to international standardization by actually participating in a number of technical committees and working groups. But I'd also like to express my appreciation to all the internal TTBS staff members that contribute to the updating and the development of compulsory standards. And also, I would like to express my thanks to the members of the families of the standards experts who would have recently passed away. So the family members of Dr. Jean Piquitino, Mr. Merlin Ramjon, Mr. Peter Sami, Professor Kocha. We definitely appreciate their contribution over a lifetime to our standardization activities for the national good. And also Devendra mentioned Dr. Lyons, the first executive director of the TTBS. Definitely Devendra. We have had stalwarts in standardization over a number of years, and they have all made a difference to the national community. On that note, I'd now like to turn the session over to Mr. Derek Lukpat, our Executive Director, to bring the session to a close. Mr. Lukpat.
Thanks, Nadita, and good morning to all. I'm pleased to bring closing remarks on World Standards Day 2021 and join the previous speakers by wishing you all a happy World Standards Day. Today, October 14th, has always been an auspicious day for TTBS, and this year is extra special given our recent achievements, and today has truly been a celebratory occasion. I applaud the efforts of all involved in the national, regional, and international standards development processes, from the hardworking committee members who volunteer their time and expertise, to the dedicated and passionate staff of the Standardization Division and the wider team at TTBS. I would like to especially thank Senator the Honorable Paula Gopee-Scoon, Minister of Trade and Industry, for her and her team at the Ministry of Trade and Industry for their consistent support and recognition of the important role of TTBS in sustainable national development. I thank the chairman of the board of TTBS, Mr. Lawford Dupree, and the entire board of directors for their leadership, commitment, and support of our standardization activities. A special thank you to Dr. Kravatsky for your leading role in ISO, firstly as the co-convener for Working Group 1, and then more recently as a vice chair of the ISO Technical Committee 309. This has been a milestone for Trinidad and Tobago as it demonstrates that we can now move beyond simply participating in international standardization, but also strategically influence, craft, and steer the direction of international standards. I am grateful to all of the panelists, Dr. Kravatsky, Mr. Devendra Chattergoon, Mr. Christian Virgil, Dr. Sanjay Bahadur Singh, who graciously volunteered their time to be with us today to enlighten us on the importance and high impact of international standards on the national landscape. They all play significant roles as chairs and members of our national merit committees, bring experts together to arrive at national consensus positions on draft international standards, as well as national and regional standards. Today's session has firmly demonstrated that standards play a major role in shaping and implementing the policy directions of our government, whether it be the National Quality Policy or Vision 2030. However, we still have much to do regarding the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In Trinidad and Tobago's voluntary national review, connecting the dots to the SDGs, the government of Trinidad and Tobago reaffirmed its commitment to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, but noted key challenges with implementation, such as funding of projects, institutional capacity, and capabilities and collaboration. As the national standards body for our nation, TTBS stands ready, together with our network of experts at the national, regional, and international level, to provide technical solutions and guidance in the form of standards to assist in the implementation of Vision 2030 and the UN SDGs. Together, we have accomplished a significant body of work already with regard to standards and other key aspects of the national quality infrastructure, from conformity assessment, metrology, and accreditation. But we must also look to the future needs for continued socio-economic development. We must keep abreast of the developments related to climate change, circular economy, sustainable finance, ICT development, energy management, as well as public health and risk management, in order to diversify our national economy in a sustainable and resilient manner, powered by a highly capable workforce. As such, TTBS maintains membership in key ISO technical committees of emerging areas of standardization in order to raise awareness of best practices in these areas. I have truly embraced in-depth technical work, collaborative and consensus-based spirit of standardization via my involvement in the ISO Technical Committee 323 for Circular Economy, and I've shared national and regional perspectives during international discussions. As we celebrate this World Standards Day, I would like to reinforce the need for deep collaboration and commitment required at all levels of society in creating a shared vision for a better world. We look forward to the year ahead and engaging with more stakeholders like yourselves who recognize the power and value of standardization for the betterment of not just Trinidad and Tobago, but the achievement of the global agenda embodied in the 17 UN SDGs. At this point, I would like to thank and commend the Standardization Division of TTBS, which was directly responsible for the excellent planning and execution of today's event. I would like to personally extend my thanks to all our stakeholders, past and present, members of the international, regional, and national standards community. We could not do our work without your input and support. It has been an honor and a privilege to engage with you all as part of the standardization community. And finally, thanks to each and every one of you for attending today's celebration. We appreciate your unwavering support and participation. Enjoy the rest of your World Standards Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lukpat. We would also like to extend our thanks to you for your support of all our standardization activities over the years. And definitely, I would like to thank all our support units, the marketing units in particular, for assisting in so many ways for this session to be well executed, as well as the wider TTBS team, the management, the leadership team. I think everyone has made a great contribution, and especially my panelists, Sanjay, Christian, Devendra, Axel, and unfortunately, Rochelle could not be with us today due to her emergency. But without the network of stakeholders, we would not be able to achieve our mandate as a standards body. So before our meeting closes off, I would like to thank everyone for attending today's session, and we look forward to engaging with you on further projects. We do have another session tomorrow on the CARICOM regional standardization aspect. Andia will be the host of that event, so I encourage everyone to participate. So again, thank you for your time. It was much appreciated, and happy World Standards Day to my network of stakeholders from across the world, because we also had our international participants, Aristea and Amori came in from the IEC. We do appreciate them, as well as our regional colleagues from the CARICOM regional standardization community. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, and see you all at our other sessions, and we look forward to your continued contribution to our standardization activities. And yes, Devendra, thank you for letting us know that we were poor at time management today, but it was definitely worth it. So the contributions from the panel discussions were excellent, and I think it has really left an impact on our standardization experts here today, that standards are of benefit and we can contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And a special thanks to Dr. Gowrie for delivering the remarks from the Ministry of Planning. We have always had a long history of collaboration with the Ministry of Planning and Development towards our national developmental agenda. So on that note, thank you everyone, and we will be closing the meeting shortly. Take care, be safe, and see you all at our next sessions. Bye.